And we're live.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Santona. Hi, everybody. I don't know how many people we have. Maybe we'll see that in a second. All right. Oh, I guess we're good. We're good to get started. So everybody, my name is Roy Hasson. I'm the VP of Product at Absolver. With us, an esteemed panel of experts, and we really wanted to kind of talk about a lot of the excitement and news and announcements over the last couple of weeks at the Snowflake Summit and then the Databricks Data and AI conference. So we'll kick it off with quick introductions. Lauren, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Lauren Balik. I run a firm called Upright Analytics. Do everything in the past, based around unscrewing all the data problems that exist in organizations. Worked with large corporations all the way down to small startups. Have done that for a number of years. And I do a ton of, basically industry analyst, equities analysis work at this point as my focus, very much tied into, the data ecosystem, cloud ecosystems, vendors, et cetera. So I've been doing that for a while.
Sorry. Awesome. Glad to have you, Matt.
Yeah, I'm Matt Housley. So with Joe Reese, I co-hosted for a long time a show on LinkedIn called Monday Morning Data Chat. We're taking a break for the summer, but we're planning to be back in the fall. And we also wrote a book called Fundamentals of Data Engineering. And so I'm certainly, thank you, Lauren. I have opinions about Iceberg and especially where I'd like to see the industry to go. I think we've seen a lot of activity lately, and in the long term, that could turn out a lot of different ways. So I'm excited for this conversation and to hear what everyone has to say.
Awesome. And Santona?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Santona. I'm head of data at Absolver, and Absolver is a control center for Iceberg. So I've been learning, using, and talking about Iceberg for a while. So definitely exciting announcements to follow up on, and just happy to be here to talk to awesome folks.
Sweet. All right. So maybe we start off with kind of, I don't know if it's the biggest news or the first news of kind of the news cycle around this is the Tabular acquisition by Databricks, which was conveniently announced during the first keynote for the Snowflake Summit, right after, I don't know if they timed it well, but right after they announced Polaris and the general availability of Iceberg managed tables in Snowflake, which are awesome. We'll talk about that in a second, but I kind of wanted to get your opinions, and we'll start with you, Lauren. What do you think about the acquisition? I know it's a big topic. I know there's a lot of kind of aspects and perspective to it, but I wanted to kind of get your perspective on, first of all, from a company acquisition perspective, did Databricks kind of do the right thing? And second of all, what's your perspective on the community, how that's going to affect the community, open source project? You've kind of seen these before, so.
Yeah, sure. So this is a large acquisition. I mean, it went for over $1 billion is what they've said. I mean, Databricks is not a public company, so they don't have to, say the amount they paid for. Probably a heavy stock deal, stock versus cash, kind of what's assumed there, and everyone kind of knows Databricks is probably going to IPO next year or at some point in the future here. So, look, I mean, Databricks has always been very territorial about the idea of the lakehouse. That's kind of their bread and butter. That's what Ali Ghodsi, their CEO, co-founder, has, been very territorial about. It's his thing. Now that Snowflake, they've kind of buddied up with Iceberg in the past. They've, like you mentioned, they put their Snowflake's Iceberg tables out in a GA that was, went live last week on the 10th. So like 8 days ago. And I mean, look, just looking at this from a business perspective, I think it makes total sense from a Databricks perspective of owning the idea of what a lakehouse is. And if people are kind of wondering what that means and how that differs from a data warehouse, it really has to do with, storage versus compute. And Snowflake makes a lot of their margin and a lot of their revenue off of compute. And, Databricks is a lot more complicated of how they make money, but like they also they really want to split this up. Like, Snowflake's kind of always said we separated storage and compute. Well, did you? Like, you kind of put it into this one box called a data warehouse, and
It's physically separated.
yeah, it's physically separated, but when you look at the cost models, like you're basically getting passed through on a very thin margin on storage and a high margin on compute there. So I mean, look, like I think this is part of the ongoing bloodbath between Snowflake and Databricks, just in general. And I think Databricks won here. And if we look at like the announcements, like the Wall Street Journal published on this, a bunch of other reputable sources, like Confluent was bidding for this. Confluent, publicly traded company, heavily in the Kafka ecosystem, moving into some Flink stuff now. It looks like Snowflake bid on this as well. So this was something that people wanted. And, Tabular as well, just, we'll get into this a little bit more as we go on here. But the people that run Tabular are the people who are on the PMC of Apache Iceberg, the project management committee. So like the people running the Apache open source project. And like a lot of the stuff that's like open source has always, kind of had like a company tied to it, and these companies get acquired. And when those types of things happen, people want to know like, oh, is the project dead, or is the project only going to be tied to this one company now? And how is that going to play out? So I'm sure we'll get into all of that, but I'll put a pin in it there. That's kind of what's been happening here.
Matt, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think the frank fact is that both Databricks and Snowflake have basically for a long time been running proprietary platforms. And people are going to get about the pitchforks when I say that about Spark, but the reality is that Databricks' goal was to get you to run Spark on their platform with their tools in a way that was very convenient, very performant, but kind of hard to move elsewhere. And, the Delta Lake project has been around for a while. It never really caught on as an interoperable standard. It was designed to be like a very flexible format in Databricks world. Both Snowflake and Databricks have come under tremendous pressure to start interoperating more. And so over time, we've seen these various announcements about supporting Apache Iceberg, which is kind of the emerging standard now. Housley just has not caught on to the same degree. And so, yeah, that's the driver of this acquisition. And it's also the driver of the announcement of the Polaris catalog, which at this point is still kind of vaporware on Snowflake's side. I think we're optimistic that could turn into something. But there are many ways to build standards that aren't really standards. And so I'm hopeful that customers will really pressure both Databricks and Snowflake to actually interoperate with other compute engines and not just to like support on paper these other standards, but make it very hard to actually interoperate, which we can get into that later. But I think our industry in general has a big problem with non-standard standards. And so I hope we don't go down that road and the customers really push to say, you know what, Databricks, you need to play nice with Snowflake. Snowflake, you need to play nice with Databricks, or we're not going to buy from you.
Right. Shantana, anything you want to add there before I jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to a couple of things that Lauren said. The first thing that I thought of was, for a while, the term lakehouse was pretty synonymous with Databricks, right? Because they had they were definitely going to market with it, whether or not they came up with it. And then, like, even I remember Roy and I discussing, a year or so ago, it's like it's a lake house, but is that term going to be confusing when if we talk about it in those terms for Databricks users or just people who know about Databricks? And the second thing I wanted to say is, I'm not sure that I am as firm as you that Databricks won with this acquisition. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that one side won, or they're, certainly as Matt said, it's sort of the beginning, or I think Lauren, you said that too, of the bloodbath. But because a bidding war for a managed open source company that is mostly the creators and curators of the open source project, doesn't feel like so I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. So clearly it's a treasure trove, right? Like Ryan Blue's really smart, everyone over at Tabular is really smart, and it's a good play to get into that. I'm, I guess, less convinced that it's necessarily like it's deterministic of what's going to happen in the near future. Because I mean, I've seen a lot of pushback in terms of like, this is open source, let's keep it open source. Why is Databricks sort of getting in there and trying to control it? So it's not super clear to me yet that it's like Databricks is for sure one. But
yeah, so I agree with everything that everybody said. I have a slight different perspective on it, where I'm sort of looking at the Tabular acquisition as a sort of like a defensive move rather than a interoperability move, as Databricks calls it. Because the reality is that Iceberg isn't magic, right? Databricks has been building Delta Lake for 3+ years. They know better than anybody how to build that type of solution. So to need to hire 40 some engineers who know Iceberg seems a bit of a stretch in order to implement interoperability, where they have some of the best developers, engineers in this space already contributing to some massive project like Spark and Delta Lake and other things. So to me, it sounds like more, hey, we just want to take them off the market so it doesn't become a leverage for Snowflake later on. And ultimately, when you read kind of Lauren, you called out the Wall Street Journal article, there's a passage in there that I posted on LinkedIn a couple of times that kind of talks about folding the Tabular team into the Uniform project. Uniform is basically the product or the capability that converts from Delta to Iceberg and Hoodie. And to me, that's like taking some of the smartest people on this planet and making them change a tire on a car. Right? It's like, that doesn't really make sense to me why you would do something like that when you can give them such a bigger kingdom and say, like, make Delta and Iceberg really interoperable, combine the capabilities. Based on all the sessions that I've watched already, the live ones from Databricks and the comments from the team, it's really about making Delta more accessible to other platforms by converting Delta into Iceberg, Delta into Hoodie. There's no conversation about the other way around, right? If you have Iceberg tables, how do you make that more accessible to the Databricks platform, right? So that's kind of where I have a little bit of a disconnect between sort of what the talking heads at Databricks and all the fanboys are saying versus the reality of this isn't actually working the way that everybody is describing it. So I think it's a bit of a Trojan horse from Databricks. What I would hope will happen is that Databricks will give Ryan and the team, Jason and Bill and all those folks, kind of like the flexibility. Oh, sorry, Dan, not Bill. The flexibility to go and develop Iceberg and continue to evolve that platform or that solution further without getting influenced by what Delta is doing and how to keep it a compatible platform. I will say that I do agree with the comment that Ali made during the keynote and in other aspects, where customers shouldn't have to make a decision whether to go to Delta or to Iceberg, right? Whether to go to Delta, Iceberg, or Hoodie, right? It should be something that just, it's default, something turns on, it just works, right? And I think that's a great statement. I just don't know if acquiring a company like Tabular for $1 billion plus is the answer to that. That seems like a bit of a stretch to me. But again, they're a private company. They can throw as much money as they want on and nobody's going to say anything. So anyway, that's kind of the point. I guess that kind of maybe the next question to that is, I think there's kind of two avenues that I see of this really evolving. One, Databricks leaves the open source team like Ryan and Dan and these other folks to kind of contribute to the Iceberg open source solution or open source project independently of what Databricks is doing, kind of leave them independent. The project continues to run independently. We'll see more contributors from Snowflake and AWS and Microsoft. Absolver is also joining that as well. so I think that's one aspect. The other aspect, Databricks kind of takes more ownership of that and start taking over and trying to kind of bring together the Delta and the Iceberg projects into maybe like a beast or something else. I don't know. Those are the two avenues that I see. I don't see them killing it at all. I think it's going to piss off too many people, but I see those are the two avenues. I don't know. What do you folks think about? Are there any other avenues? Do you agree, disagree? Anyone jump in?
I think the issue that is likely to emerge with Iceberg is not that the open source project will stall. I think it's all the surrounding infrastructure that you need to run Iceberg. So, for example, one company has a data catalog to monitor everything that's happening in Iceberg, and maybe a compaction system. Well, what ensures that your catalog and compaction system doesn't step on someone else's catalog and compaction system? When Snowflake first announced support for Iceberg, I think this is, I don't know, 2 years back or something, it was read only. So in other words, they would write to Iceberg, but no one else was allowed to touch it. You just had to read from their Iceberg. And so it really wasn't interoperable. And so I think that's the danger with all of these vendors, that they'll create some version where it's like, oh yeah, you can use our Iceberg, but you can't really do anything. You can't compact it. You can't manage the catalog. You need to go through us so that we're the spoke, or we're the hub, and everyone else is a spoke off of that. And so again, that's where I hope that buyers will really push companies to say, no, you need to play nice with everyone else, and we're going to put it in our contract. And if you don't do that, then there are going to be words between us. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Lauren? Because I think we've seen this over and over again in data, where it's like you check the compliance box for cooperating with other companies, but you make it really tough to do that, right?
Yeah, well, you brought up an interesting word there, and that word is contract. And I would compare that with the word community. And contract means capitalism, and community means communism. You know, and you know, I'm being a little funny here, but like, you know, a lot of the stuff that is open source, some of the Apache Foundation, which is great, and the Apache Foundation sponsors a lot of open source projects that are, you know, run the internet and run the world. And they're great. And, you know, I think people need to be aware that, like, you know, at the end of the day, like, you know, you're a data engineer, you're making a lot of money, or as an analyst or data scientist, or, you know, whatever job title you have, or as a manager of that team, or whatever, product manager, you're, you know, it's very much a capitalist type of thing. And when things happen where people get, when a big acquisition happens, like, you know, $1 billion, and, you know, oh, this amount of money is moving here and this amount of money is moving there, and, you know, everyone suddenly turns into a communist, and they talk about like, oh, well, you know, open standards and open source this, and it should be free and blah blah blah. And that's just not how the world works. So like, I would say that, like, yeah, customers should be pushing in their contracts, you know, and putting in their stipulations that, like, you know, there's optionality in there. And, you know, the smartest customers will do that. And the customers that don't push for that, or don't have a procurement team that will push for that, are kind of at the mercy of how the ecosystem works. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're, you know, if you're spending $10 million a year on Snowflake or on Databricks, or, you know, maybe 10 million on each, plenty of companies use both, and AWS and Google Cloud and Azure and whatever. Like, you have a sophisticated procurement team there, and that team needs to go ahead and partner with you as a data engineer, VP of analytics, VP of data, whatever. And, you know, ideally you want the best outcome for yourself. And that means the optionality to move between certain stuff. I do think interoperability here, like, we talk about interoperability, and that has to get into the idea of network effects. Like right now, all the VCs are, you know, they like the idea that everything is, oh, Iceberg is the future. Like, you know, I see this on Twitter all the time, on, you know, venture capital Twitter. which is if you want to lose some brain cells but learn how the industry works, you can go join VC Twitter and follow how all this works. But everyone wants, Iceberg, everything will be built on Iceberg, and it'll be S3, AWS S3, their storage, with Iceberg on top of it, and that will power a bunch of apps and a bunch of storage for apps in the future. That's how it's all built. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But a lot of the money that's going to flow into this, like a lot of the venture money, kind of expects right now that there will be like Iceberg as the format for how a lot of this works, which is not the same, by the way, as being a customer of this and working at a Fortune 500 company or wherever and using these products. Okay, so like a lot of the noise out there is around where the venture dollars are going to go. And if venture wants to put money into new companies that build on Iceberg, which is what they've kind of anointed right now, but they're kind of cautious about building apps that are based on Iceberg on top of storage, then Iceberg, will continue to exist.
So you're kind of saying that the assumption they're making is that Iceberg is the default storage, and now the focus is on the applications that are right on top of it.
That's correct, but that's different, and that's what's happening. But that's different than you as your staff data engineer working at blah, blah, blah company, trying to decide, I don't know, how to move data around in your organization.
Right.
Those are different things. So there are a couple different conversations here, but
they're focusing higher on the stack than most of these.
Right. Because they want to build applications on this, and they want to invest in companies and get a return on them that are built on Iceberg on top of S3, and that's what they're looking at.
And I appreciate it. I mean, one of the messages that we've always communicated is this idea of shared storage, and whether that shared storage is on Iceberg or Delta, whatever, we're kind of banking on Iceberg. But the idea of shared storage is really, really powerful. And I think one of the kind of indicators or not justifications, but like proof points of this was when Salesforce, the Salesforce Data Cloud, actually they came out and said like, hey, we support Iceberg now, which means you can interoperate or integrate with Snowflake tables, right? Snowflake did the same thing with Azure Fabric. They're using Xtable to convert, but they basically said like, hey, we can talk to each other. So to me, that concept of shared storage starts to resonate a lot more. Now, I believe that Iceberg will be that format. I think Databricks are kind of saying like, we really want Delta to be that format, but if you really want Iceberg, we'll give you a view of your data in the Iceberg format, which is the thing I have a little bit of beef with. But regardless, I think the concept of shared storage really, really resonates. And then to your point, Lauren, now the investment dollars are going to go into, now that we have a shared storage, what are the applications that we can build on top of that are really going to benefit from this and really drive the revenue on top of this Iceberg concept? So we're playing in the mud, right? We're throwing mud at each other down in the low levels.
It's all mud throwing. The whole industry is mud throwing right now. That's the dominant theme. It's all mud throwing, which is interesting.
Yeah. But you got to do it because otherwise you don't have a foundation, right? Yeah.
I really like what you said, Lauren, and actually I'd like to refocus the conversation on the staff data engineers or data engineers at any level. Like, I fully agree that the bulk of the conversation or the discussion is driven by, of course, VCs and the the way that the market works. And yeah, we're all trying, or not all, but there's so many companies, including ourselves, that's trying to build that layer for, the control center for your Iceberg Lakehouse. And as you said, there are going to be additional applications built on top of that. And that's what folks are going to try to sell. But like, I do want to get back to what should data engineers be thinking about? How should they prepare themselves for like this? Because not everyone's on the Lakehouse yet. Not everyone's even on Cloud Data Warehouse yet, right? So there's a little bit of a catch up there, and also like how should they fortify themselves or make themselves appealing, and really in the know for this next phase. And maybe as a corollary, I'll go back to Airflow as an example, right? Airflow had, or it still does, has such a robust ecosystem of folks actually using it. So I was using it in production without any self-managed, right, without buying any of the managed versions. And even when I worked at a managed Airflow provider, it's this is good. We're there for the folks that need the additional support, but also you can run this by yourself, and the open source project and the community is large enough to really support that. So the second part of my point is, what is the situation for Iceberg? Are we I don't feel like we're really there yet in terms of activity and curation of the open source usage, open usage. I think while there's this acceleration of abstraction layers and management layers on top of that. And Matt,
I'll go in, and then I'll let Matt answer. But I mean, just this is not a shot at Tabular, but I don't really think they had many customers that were using Tabular. And when the acquisition happened, it's an acquisition for the technology, not for a multiple of the ARR or revenue, right? And that's kind of obvious. It's not like, oh, you made $200 million a year and we're paying a 5x multiple of that or whatever. That's not the case here. And it's not the case with a lot of data companies, frankly. So I don't really think that the vendors like Upsolver and many others, are able to, build on this stuff and control this narrative. And it depends on how far that, what does the staff data engineer, just to pick a title, someone who, is moderately senior and knows their stuff and works for a company, as their 9 to 5 or whatever job, or 9 to 5 plus, hours outside of that to firefight. What is that person doing with it as it relates to Iceberg? And the idea here is that how much do they need to know about Iceberg? Iceberg, is it lower or higher in the stack of what they actually need? Are they buying an application that kind of manages all the stuff for them? Are they out here doing open source stuff on this? And I think with this acquisition, what we're going to see is that a lot of vendors are going to manage this. Databricks, one of them, Upsolver, one of them, and plenty of others, can offer a managed kind of experience on Iceberg. And maybe the nuances of how Iceberg works are kind of abstracted away a little bit. And so that's kind of where I see this going. I don't know if that's the Upsolver party line, but it probably is. Maybe, I don't know. But that's, I think that how much are you using something that's been a little bit packaged up for you versus how much are you going into the raw underlying stuff? And what you mentioned with Airflow, and with companies like Astronomer and others out there that offer a managed Airflow, or even AWS's version of it, or Google Composer, Cloud Composer. I don't know, a lot of times it's not worth the engineer's time to really go in and pick apart the nuances of how the underlying tech works if they can get something packaged up and managed for them. And I'm very much a person who likes to dig, but there's also you have to balance what it means, and how much, how many hours you want to spend per day doing something that can already be scaled up for you and packaged for you. But anyways, I'll Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, my thought to your question, Santona, is that I think staff data engineers in general need to get a lot better at architecture and orchestration both. And what I mean is this: since my time in the industry, we've seen several waves come through in data. So first, everyone was supposed to be learning MapReduce and maybe Pig and some other frameworks, right? Everything was Hadoop, and that's what a data engineer was. It was someone who could like sit down and sit at a keyboard and type, write MapReduce jobs in Java or something. And then suddenly it was Spark. It's like, okay, you need to get like really in the nitty gritty of Spark, and you need to learn Scala, and you need to write really efficient Spark jobs. And I think to kind of call out something Lauren has been saying on Twitter for a while, a lot of the focus now for data engineers needs to be on looking at the architecture, looking at the costs and saying, maybe I'm spending $5 million a year on Snowflake ETL jobs, or maybe I'm spending $5 million a year on Databricks ETL jobs. And maybe it's time to re-architect. And that means, okay, I'm going to still have these engines in certain places in my pipeline, but I'm going to refactor the really expensive parts. And I'm going to use something like Apache Iceberg and possibly Airflow or some other orchestration engine to do that. That is, I'm going to break my job into the more moving parts, and I'm going to use the tool that will save me potentially millions of dollars by going to something that's a lot cheaper. And that's not necessarily about being like a super expert in Spark programming, but it is about being able to profile jobs and say, okay, at this level, I'm spending a huge amount of money. This is where data interop can really save me a lot of money in my pipelines. That's kind of my thought. And then once you've made those architecture decisions, you can get your engineers in the nitty gritty to refactor to save those large amounts of money. I don't think anyone cares about like optimizing jobs that cost a small amount of money, but when you get at that scale, there's potentially a lot of money on the table with interop.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think that all makes a lot of sense. And if you're talking about staff engineers, kind of the responsibility of building a scalable architecture and things like that, having a standard compliant storage layer is a really, really big deal and something you should be thinking about, because data migration is extremely expensive, right? To be able to move it out of one platform to another, whether if you do everything with Databricks and Delta Lake, and tomorrow you decide I got to go to Snowflake and I want to go to Iceberg, well, you really can't, right? You got to rewrite a lot of your data. You got to move a lot of stuff. It's just a ton of work that you got to do. So picking the right architecture there and the right specs or standards is a big deal. And I think kind of confusing the market with Delta and Hudi and Iceberg is a decision that engineers have to make. What do I bank on? Like, what do I build on? If I build on Iceberg today, but tomorrow Databricks is gonna kill it, right? Then what did I do, right? I screwed myself. If I pick Delta and tomorrow they do something else and they lock me in, then I'm screwed. I gotta go to Iceberg, right? So it's an important aspect of it. But I think the point for staff engineer, like Matt and Lauren were saying, I think the decisions are starting to become higher and higher level as opposed to lower and lower. Like, we're not making decisions on the actual code that you're writing, but more on the platform, the architecture, the decisions you need to make, whether it's performance based, cost based, portability, multi-cloud. There's a lot of decisions that go into that. I think generally speaking, like the table format of Iceberg in particular kind of checks a lot of those boxes, because one of the biggest challenges with traditional Hive and Hadoop was, being able to optimize data, reduce your storage cost, improve query performance. There were a lot of best practices. I know when I was at AWS as a data engineer working with a lot of customers, we shared a lot of best practices, but it ultimately fell on the engineers' lap to go actually implement them, right? Write the code that compacts, write the code that does all these things. So now that it's baked into a standard, everybody knows how to do it in a standard compliant way. So you have a consistent behavior across the board, whether you're in AWS or Azure or Google, Databricks or Snowflake, right? Everything is consistent. So you should expect consistent performance, consistent cost savings across the board. And I think that's a really powerful model, and that's something that Iceberg brings. Now, the other formats bring as well. There's a bit of a kind of like who owns that engine or who tunes and tweaks that engine. And I think Iceberg has the most flexibility around that and kind of the most openness. But ultimately, I think that sort of should be the focus of the staff engineers, making sure you build your company's platform on the right building blocks so that in 5 years from now or in 2 years from now, when you want to re-architect like Matt suggested, you're not rebuilding from scratch, copying data, exporting stuff, because that's going to take time. It's going to cost you a lot of money. I've seen this over and over again.
Yeah, I think. Well, I'll add something on there. Like, I think any organization, if you're a good engineer and you know how different systems work together, and that's BI systems, AI platforms, machine learning, like Python, all of these other things, like how everything kind of works together. Like, where your like Gordian knot is, right? And the Gordian knot is something from like Greek mythology. It's this complex knot, and I think like Alexander the Great is the only person who could like solve it or whatever. So every company has a knot, and for a while, like at some companies, like the knot was in BI tools. Like you just shoved everything through, and then the analysts did it in like Tableau or something. And the knot was always like, why doesn't this match this? Why doesn't this match that? Blah, blah, blah. And that knot was because like Tableau has a SQL-like language that like exists within Tableau, and they want to own that. They want to own the knot. And then, with cloud data warehouses and the rise of that, like there's a lot of knots in like just making like views and tables and using SQL within the platform. And then DBT came along, and there's a lot of knots within DBT. And now there's people who have like 10,000 DBT models that like a lot of it's duplicitous or duplicative or whatever the term is. And where is your knot? And now like this is, all this open format type of stuff is saying like, all right, well, we can move the knot, like we'll untie the knots over here and we'll make it a little bit better over on the storage side and make storage formats, and that is where the knot will be solved, and then everything flows through better. And it all sounds good, but at the end of the day, we're talking about technologies, and the best companies know how to untangle their knot wherever the knot is. And that knot might be in DBT, it might be in all these Tableau files, or whatever. You could substitute whatever other insert vendor name here, wherever it's possible. But like, everyone wants to figure that out. So anyone who's like a data engineer who wants to like advance their career and really like own stuff, like the more you can describe the knot or the knots that exist in your company and how to solve them, the better off you are. And Iceberg can be an example of that. And so can other technologies. But like figuring out what that knot is the most important. So anyways,
Yep. Yeah, 100%. Let me just agree on that. And it's not the best companies, right? It's like it's individuals within those companies that have that, both domain knowledge and the stack knowledge to be able to find the knot. And I think that's really my point. This is definitely coming from a very personal bias, and not the Upsolver party line, but it's totally fine. Like abstractions are great, managed services are great. It makes life simple. You got to use that technology, but you also have to know how it works, right? This is what I keep coming back to, is like we're early still, I would say, in the Iceberg journey. It's sort of been like big companies, massive scale, and then now we have like the tools are being bought out and more tools are being built. What about the people with normal scale data and that are hearing about Iceberg for the first time? I think you absolutely need to figure out how it works, and that's even if you buy, which you should probably buy, you're going to be able to make better buy decisions if you actually know how it works and what it's about.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Sorry, man.
Oh, I was just going to say to what you were saying, Shantanu, I totally agree with you on it. It's really important to understand how these things work under the hood. And again, that doesn't mean like being in the open source code necessarily, but just understanding the basics of how it works. So for example, Lauren, in consulting, how many times have you gotten into companies and discovered that they're using Snowflake like a transactional database, and it's just like their costs are exploding? I've seen this again and again. And that's an example of like, you just throw a tool at an engineer and say, oh, it's just like MySQL, or it's just like Oracle. It's exactly the same. And then they'll try to use it the same way. So we need to do the same thing with Iceberg, understand just how the machinery works under the hood. And I want to go back to something you were saying, Roy, about the danger of the Iceberg as an open format kind of being killed by a purchase. I actually think that the biggest danger is not that. I think it's more what I call shiny object syndrome. And that is, in this industry, every couple of years, we're chasing a new trend. And so the danger here is that just like everyone jumped on the Hadoop bandwagon, we all jump on the Iceberg bandwagon. And then 2 years later, we start chasing something else and say, oh, by the way, you need to migrate all your data to this new thing because that's not good enough anymore. And people stop, focusing on the open source. The project stops growing. It stagnates. We lose our interoperability.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I completely agree with you, and I think we should probably segue a little bit to the other Iceberg news. And I think in particular, since we're talking about shiny object syndrome, is the Iceberg REST catalog, right? And for folks who don't know, right, there's been I actually did a webinar a couple of days ago about migrating from Hive to Iceberg, and we talked about this topic as well. But most of the Hadoop world kind of use the Hive data catalog, which has been around for a long time, built on top of Hadoop platforms. It's good, but it has some limitations around scale and very, very, very large tables. And the other piece to it is that there's a lot of dependencies like Hadoop, Java, E dependencies that are really hard to implement, to integrate with. The idea of an Iceberg REST catalog is to basically create a very lightweight catalog standard that anybody can implement very easily without a lot of Java knowledge or Hadoop knowledge or any of those kind of like archaic technologies. Java is not really archaic, but you get the point. So now what we're seeing is that we're seeing this shiny object or even the knot that Lauren was talking about, sort of moving to the catalog. And I've said in a couple blog posts and some posts on LinkedIn as well, is that I see the next kind of battle on owning the customer or owning the data is going to happen in the metadata layer, right? So like data gravity was the problem initially, or that was the area where you compete on. Now data gravity with Iceberg format is sort of not there anymore, not really an issue anymore, because we standardize it, we level the playing field, everybody can read and write and access that data, so you don't longer have data lock-in. So now, vendors are kind of moving towards the metadata lock-in and saying, well, you know what, the next step is, if you really want to control access to the data, you need to control access to the metadata. And with Iceberg and other formats like that, there's more than just the schemas and partitions that we're used to. There's transactions, there's ability to lock tables, there's multi-table transactions, the concurrency controls. There's a bunch of these extra or new things that are potentially increasing the lock-in that a vendor could have. And seeing Snowflake announcing Polaris, which is an open source Iceberg standard catalog implementation. They said it's going to be available in 90 days. Like Matt said, I'm not quite sure. I have some conversation, not quite sure where it is technically. But let's assume that happens. And then, Databricks announced open sourcing Unity catalog, which was their existing catalog for the last couple of years. The open source, kind of the core capability of it. They did say that they are going to support an Iceberg REST implementation. They sort of made it seem like it's going to be open source, but if you look at the open source repo, it's not actually there. So it does support Iceberg table created by Uniform and registered in Unity catalog, but it uses the Unity API. It doesn't use the Iceberg REST API. So that's a bit of a kind of like bait and switch, maybe, kind of using the Iceberg term in a generic way to imply both table format and catalog format. But that's I kind of wanted to get that out there because it seemed to be pretty confusing. But the thought that maybe the question is, again, now that we're moving the control point to the metadata layer, do you see the same thing happening from your perspective? How do you see, back to the question, the staff engineer, do they need to understand something different here? How should we kind of crack that nut or understand it better? Whoever wants to answer, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I'll go first. So here, here, let me just hit a button real quick. Let me hit share screen. And I'm going to go to, So can you see my screen here? Is my screen sharing?
It's coming.
There we go.
Yeah, here's the Polaris catalog. So like,
You might want to zoom in. Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Let's
here
see.
this is what Snowflake's put
Yeah,
out, and
yeah.
like, they had a big booth and a big presentation about this, and they said we're going to deliver this in 90 days. And a lot of data engineers and myself are finicky people, and this is what they put out, which is I don't know, it's a JPEG or an image or something, and here's what they have. Someone put out an issue. Congrats on the open source. Where's the code? So Snowflake's on the hook to deliver on this, and putting out a blank repo is what they've done, and we'll see what happens. And if we go to the Unity catalog, I don't know if it's going to pop up here. Like Unity, and you can look this up on GitHub, has been around for a little while, and let me go in here into present, share screen.
And while you're doing that, Lauren, let me say as well that there are other models for open source, right? Like Airflow, for example, was immediately open sourced. In other words, it was developed in the open, and that's not happening with Polaris. It is not being developed in the open.
Not yet. I mean, I don't know if that necessarily is their perspective. I think they basically said, like, look, we need to get ahead of this. We need to put something out there that shows, we're gonna own the catalog aspect, because as I said, metadata is kind of the next battleground. And I think they put something out there, like they need to start contributing code and doing that. And I think it's going to happen. Ideally, it's going to be a community-driven project. We're actually looking to participate in that as well, because we see value there. The thing with Unity Catalog, again, is they kind of took what they already had and they open sourced it, which is great. They built a really, really good catalog, and there's a lot of awesome features. So I'm very bullish about Unity Catalog. The question now becomes, like, now are we going to have this catalog battle between these two vendors? And at the end of the day, who's going to win from this? You're going to, again, end up with two things that are comparable, and you got to pick: is it Databricks or is it Snowflake? As long as they integrate and they kind of come back to a standard sort of Iceberg catalog protocol, and they stay on that, I think the first part of it is done. I think we'll have interoperability. The next conversation will become security and access controls, right? Some of those governance things, that's where, like, okay, now it's not going to be quite the same. And we've, when I worked on AWS Lake Formation a few years ago, we kind of agreed Glue Catalog is like the standard catalog in AWS, but then security was the next level. And then there's a bunch of interoperability issues across engines. So again, the battle is going to keep creeping up the stack into different things, but at least it's good to see that both of them are going out there. What I would love to see, and I think would benefit users, is instead of trying to outdo each other, to just focus on delivering, right? Put the code out there, commit to, deliver what you committed to, show interoperability, get the work done, include the community on this, and not just try to, outbid the other one and keep fighting each other. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to see their parents fighting, right? So, and that's really what we're doing right now. It's not helping anybody.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because everybody, all of the vendors are fighting with each other, and like it's gone out of control. It's been out of control for like 2 years. Excuse me. And I think it's all entertaining. There's a good entertainment value to it. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, who's going to win here? And like, and the answer is it's not a winner take all type of thing. It's, Databricks is going to go public, and Snowflake is already a public company, and they both have to show revenue and earnings numbers every quarter, every year, et cetera, et cetera. And what this means is that like a lot of the biggest customers already have commitments with both of these companies, and they have commitments with all three of the big hyperscaler clouds. So Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS. And a lot of them still use Oracle. And like, let's be frank here, like Snowflake, like a lot of their like customer count, like people like Snowflake for the data sharing, and the data sharing is nice and it's great. You don't have to use an FTP or set up all this, email type of stuff. You can just, send over your data through data sharing with, your customers or whoever the downstream users are. And that's where a lot of their growth has come from in terms of the number of customers. So we'll see what happens with all this. I would say that staff engineers should, I'm just using that as a title. You could be a VP of analytics. You could be a junior data engineer. You could be whatever your title is. You're someone who's working at a customer. Push these people on social media when they make claims about we're doing this and we're doing that and whatever, and just ask a question. And don't let any of these big multi-billion-dollar vendors, kick you, or ask an honest question, do it with good intentions, and say like, hey, I see this, like, what's the plan here? Like, because right now the gap between reality and what's claimed is at an all-time high. So, if someone's making claims on the internet about things, maybe it's on LinkedIn, maybe it's on Twitter, maybe it's on YouTube stuff. Like, I don't know, push them a little bit, because like these are very well-funded companies that are, selling increasing amounts of, stuff that can kind of be vapory. And so, have an honest conversation.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
I see it everywhere. And especially when they're trying to compete with each other on a very tight timeline. You put stuff out there and you say, well, we'll release it in 90 days. We'll get to it later. I
most people don't go that level deeper.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say is that we use open source as a very generic term, but there are actually a lot of different flavors of open source. So there's open source as in Linux, and I will make a deliberately controversial statement about Linux. Linux is basically commercial software, by which I mean, yes, there's an awesome community, but a lot of the people in the community work for places like Google and get paid to contribute. But the magic with Linux is that all these big tech companies had enough of an incentive to work together that they mostly cooperated, right? Google created containers, which are now still the pretty hot thing now. All these different companies made contributions to make the code do what they wanted, but also allowed other people to use it. And then you have like open source as in Redis or Java or other companies where, yeah, at one point the code was open, but maybe you can get sued for using it, or maybe they're going to fork it on you. And I'm really hoping with Iceberg that we get something a bit more like Linux, where it really is a cooperation between all these different companies, and a little bit less like Redis, where it can be forked so that it kind of gets shut down, to what you were saying, Roy.
Yeah, no, good.
What Matt said made me think of something interesting. So it's slightly maybe outside of the intended discussion, but why do you think? So now that the big players are within the ring, right? We can like sort of we can push them, and like we can get some sort of, hopefully we can get some sort of like collaboration and stuff. And I mean our early signs will show that, right? Like Snowflake announcements in particular, where like, hey, we're partnering with all of these logos to try to bring this to you. Is it possible anymore as a small company to really shepherd a open source project into like actual like not remain as a little bubble somewhere? Or do you sort of need the giants to step in and be like, oh yeah, this is important, let's do this?
I think it's really tough, to be honest. I think in some sense, Tabular is sort of an exception that proves the rule. I think where we see the most success with open source these days is if a company is using it as a component. That is, they offer some really cool product, and they say, hey, by the way, for this product, we had to develop this cool thing. We hope everyone will use it. Here you go. But it seems like these days it's just really hard to make your whole product open source. And again, Tabular managed to do it, but it was just like a particular alignment, a particular moment in the industry that made that work. I don't know. What do you think, Mortimer Roy?
And as Lauren said, I mean, they didn't have a lot of paying customers, right?
Precisely.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need big companies involved in this. I mean, Iceberg grew up out of Netflix, right? Like, so, like, you know, these are companies that like face these, you know, certain scaling problems that maybe not everybody needs. Like a lot of this open source and other companies, whether open source or not, come out of Uber, they come out of DoorDash, they come out of Airbnb, they come out of, you know, these companies that face these scaling issues, or, you know, they hit a wall in some way. And so I think you do need large players to push this forward, and then to sponsor this and contribute going forward. You need people at these large companies to make these open source projects work. And this kind of goes back to the earlier point I made that, like, I don't know, like way too many people, I think, go into this, like, you know, expecting communism, you know, and the good of the community or whatever, but that's never been the case. There's not a single example really of you know, for the good of the community, because everyone has monetary incentives involved, and that's the way it works.
So I fully agree, right? For example, when folks at Netflix created Iceberg, or folks at Airbnb created Airflow, right? They were solving a problem that that helped towards their bottom line, which was making money. But when they made it open source, right? That was, I want to assume, and I think I'm correct in assuming, that was with good intent, right? Because we've built this cool technology for our problem. Let's see if anyone else has use for it. I think there's a second class of sort of the bigger companies coming in that are just taking that and going to offer a managed service. Now, look, I love tooling. Like, I've been working in data tooling for some time, and I think, you know, absolutely, like Databricks, Snowflake, and Upsolver, all of these companies are doing great work. But I think it's slightly different, though, to say like that it's always been big companies shepherding the open source. There's like building something to solve a problem, and then there's like adopting it to, you know, make money, I think.
I mean, I think a lot of open source tools, especially in the data space, have been developed by larger companies like Airbnb and Uber and LinkedIn and those guys, because they deal with much bigger, complex problems than most companies, right? And when they do that, they have to build these tools on their own, right? Smaller companies, startups typically don't run into scale issues. So they don't need to build Hive because they got billions and billions of rows or petabytes of data they need to query over, right? They just use Postgres. So I think you end up with these companies creating these tools, and then these creators coming out of these companies and saying, well, let me go build a company around it, right? Vinod from Uber built Hoodie and built One House on top of that. Ryan with Iceberg and Tabular. There's Jay from Confluent and Kafka. So there's lots of these, and that's perfectly fine. It's a great way to do it. I think we have to make sure that those communities continue to grow kind of independent of that parent company. In Confluent world, they got big, they put a lot of engineers, they supported, but they also developed the community, right? With Tabular, they started small, they built a really, really big community. Now Databricks is coming in. It could be awesome. It could just be an infusion of cash, engineers, marketing, build a really amazing community, or it can be, F you, we're gonna suck the air out of the room, and then you're on your own because we want our product. Hopefully they won't do it, because Databricks is a really great open source, contributor, user. They've done so many good things for the open source community. So I'm really hopeful that they will do the right thing here. But ultimately, the community will have to drive this. And the cool thing about Iceberg is that I see, AWS, I see Snowflake, Salesforce, Microsoft, Google, all these big companies getting behind it, saying like, yes, Databricks is big, they're powerful, but so are we. and we got the engineers and we got the people, and let's just, the resources. Let's just keep moving this forward. So I think it'll be successful over time. I think there's nothing at this point that Databricks can really do to affect the community or the project itself. So I'm pretty confident that Iceberg is going to continue becoming the next big thing, and we're all in for a fun ride. Any I know we're kind of coming to an end, but any other announcements from Databricks and Snowflake Summit that we wanted to call out? I mean, besides Snowflake going GA with their Iceberg tables, we played with them a little bit. They look okay. Performance isn't great yet. There's still some work to be done. The Polaris catalog, as you saw, it's an empty repo. Hopefully there'll be more in it in the coming weeks. Unity catalog has uniform as a way to convert to Iceberg, but the Iceberg catalog isn't really there yet. So that's another thing that they made fun of Databricks, like, 90 days, we can do it now, even though they didn't release the actual thing that they said they're going to release. And then there's a few other things, there's Lake Flow, which is something that actually kind of competes a bit with what Absolver is doing, but really bringing in the Delta Live tables, which is a real-time materialization of transformation of SQL on top of Delta tables. They made that, much more robust. Absolver does the same thing, but on top of Iceberg tables. So I think that's something that came out that was really interesting. Delta Lake has a lot of cool features, performance improvements. Of course, with uniform, you can convert to Iceberg. But the beef that I still have is that still a one-way street. Like, I really want it to be a two-way street. If today you generate from a Delta table and Iceberg table, and you go to optimize that table, or you go to update that table, you destroy your Delta table, right? So that's like giving a really nice gun to a bunch of people who love to look at their feet and shoot them. So I think it's gonna be asking for a lot of pain, but that's what it is. What it is. Matt, Lauren, anything that you guys heard that kind of jumped to mind that would be interesting to talk about?
On my end, I'm just curious to see how the whole security thing plays out with Snowflake. 165 plus customers, were hacked or whatever. They're doing that thing there. But like the announcements that came out of this, I think Databricks for a while has been the nerdier platform. And what I mean by nerdier is like they're more Spark focused, more like, with file formats with Delta. There's something that people use for machine learning, whereas Snowflake has traditionally been a data warehouse for a BI tool. Now you see them both. Like, you see Databricks doing this, and it's not that one's higher than the other. I'm just, motioning here. But like, you see Snowflake trying to develop ML, AI, whatever type of features, and sell this. And they've done this with Snowpark and their Snowpark containers. They've done this in a number of other ways. They're trying to move to more complex or sophisticated use cases, whereas Databricks has kind of already had a bit of that market in these more sophisticated or complex use cases. And they're trying to move down and build a data warehouse that competes with Snowflake, and they have. So both are encroaching on each other more and more. And I think that, to my earlier point, like if you're an engineer out there or head of a team and you run this stuff, you should, there's a ton of blogs, there's a ton of YouTube videos that all these companies put out, and 75% of it is woo-woo, whatever. And you should, dig in and get some answers on certain things and pick the best solutions that work for you. And it's going to turn into more of a bloodbath. And I'm excited for the entertainment value. And I'm excited because the more these companies compete and the more they compete with each other, the better it is for customers, actually. I know a lot of data engineering types may not like conflict, or they may not like, going online and trying to learn something and seeing these people just, fling feces at one another on Reddit or on Twitter or on LinkedIn or whatever. But, it's actually better because the more they compete, the more options there are. And so always push any vendor on what they claim versus what they do. And I'll leave it.
Do you think they're eating too much so they can chew? Like, do you think they're getting too big and broaching into like, or expanding into areas that maybe they really shouldn't? Like Snowflake, they're a data warehouse, right? They're building Snowpark as a data engineering. They're doing machine learning. Now they're moving into Iceberg. Now they're moving into catalogs. Databricks, data engineering, moving into data warehousing. Like, they're not hugely different, right? But at the end of the day, are they just becoming too big and trying to do too many things?
Well, they're all Databricks and Snowflake are priced for growth, so they have to grow,
and they have to be platforms.
If they don't grow, then the equity falls out because it's already priced in to the equity, like the stock price, whether private or public, that they're going to grow and win. So they have to do it, and whether that happens or not is a separate story. Like, I'm kind of bearish. I mean, I'm very, very bearish on Snowflake. Databricks, I don't really care either way. They're not a public company. I don't have any stake in them. But look, I mean, like, and just to bring up the other players like Google Cloud, like, they're just kind of chugging along. Google Cloud, and you can run Iceberg with Google Cloud, and you can run Iceberg with AWS and with Azure and stuff, to bring it into this conversation here. And a lot of these hyperscalers are just kind of chugging along and winning some share away from these guys here and there. So we'll see what happens.
Is the competition ultimately not Databricks versus Snowflake, but Databricks and Snowflake versus the hyperscalers?
I think so, in a way. And that's because like Databricks has historically been very tied into the Microsoft ecosystem, and there's a bunch of sales stuff around that. Like people always need to think about things of higher level versus lower level. Like Snowflake is a markup on AWS at the end of the day because most of their customers run AWS. Like, it's a markup on AWS, and it's nice to use and it's easy to use. And because it's easier to use than, say, Redshift for most customer use cases and easier to get started than most customer use cases, there's a markup on it. And it's very similar with Databricks and like their history with Microsoft, but also AWS. Like, they like Fabric kind of stinks, in my opinion. Someone might be mad at me about that if they've if they're a big Fabric fanboy or fangirl or whoever, but Fabric kind of stinks. Synapse kind of stinks, and like Microsoft reps were getting paid on selling Databricks at one point. I think they still are, because these companies that sell the underlying resources, whether that's EC2 or S3 or anything in the Azure ecosystem for Microsoft, like, at the end of the day, they don't care what sits on the higher layer above them, because the P&Ls that matter are S3 and EC2 at AWS. And that's kind of how it all works. And like the Redshift team might not like Snowflake, and I know they don't, but like the Redshift team matters this much at AWS, but the S3 and EC2 teams matter this much at AWS, right? So like all this stuff that's like a layer built, and this is all kind of obfuscated because for engineers and analysts and data scientists and whoever, they become fanboys, fangirls, whatever, out of building out of the user experience of it. And so if they have a good user experience, they'll start talking about it on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. So like the money always rolls back to the hyperscalers at the end of the day. And the hyperscalers, AWS controls Sridhar at Snowflake more than Sridhar at Snowflake controls AWS. Let's be clear. And then, kind of similarly, Databricks is in a little bit of a similar situation. So that's kind of how this all works at at the deep state level of all this.
Yeah, 100%. That's my view as well. Like putting it slightly differently, Snowflake and Databricks are encroaching on each other's spaces because there is nowhere else to go. Like the next place to go would be into the AWS, Google, and Azure
Right.
space. So, which yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna happen. But for now, like there's most teams that have a data need are actually doing analytics. So Databricks sees that and wants to go into that space. And on the other side, everyone's trying to get on some sort of AI or ML hype, and Snowflake sees that and tries to go into Databricks' space. That's gonna happen.
I think that's totally right.
Totally right.
And I think that's why Databricks is kind of in the lead right now, because they're riding the Gen AI hype cycle. 2 years ago, I would have told you that Snowflake was way ahead because they just kind of owned the data warehouse space. And Databricks, frankly, just wasn't very compelling in data warehousing at the time. And I think to Lauren's point, it's going to continue to be a horse race. And so if you're a customer, make it work for you. Like make sure you push the competition hard.
And I think costs will also go down from that push and the healthy competition again, right?
Yeah,
That's so
completely
interesting.
agree. Yeah.
I'll make one comment. I don't know if we want to do a Q&A here or whatever. I mean, I've got another hour here. I could DM around for an hour, but like one of the things with AI and what I see with developing with AI and AI on SQL and AI on data stuff and blah, 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 is this idea that like the hyperscalers in Snowflake and your Databricks and whatever are going to be incentivized to write you the best code. And, whether it's Copilot or something else, there's 100 of these things out there right now. None of these companies are incentivized to deliver you the most cost-efficient answer when you prompt or query anything. And this isn't, tinfoil hatty. Like, this is just the way things work. Like, why would they deliver you something that, at scale, makes your costs on their platform go down?
100% agree. Yeah, because the business model is the multiplier on top of the storage and compute. So fully agree. There is no inherent incentive, but if you're, the store next door to you is selling the same goods and they're charging less, you're gonna, so, just like market pulls, right? So that's why I think as there's further and further like closing of the gap between Snowflake and Databricks, that like hopefully there's going to be a push towards lowering costs as well.
And there's another aspect too. And that there's something in business, in economic theory called Jevons paradox. And the idea with Jevons paradox is that you make something more efficient. And so you assume you're going to use less. Like even though we have massive cars in America, they're way more efficient than they were in the 70s. And yet we use more fuel because people drive more. Or you look at aircraft, since the 1950s, we've reduced fuel consumption by like 80%. And yet people fly so much that we use more. And I suspect we're going to see similar things in the data world where it's just so convenient and so cheap that we actually end up spending more money. We just I think we've seen this with Snowflake.
Yeah, I mean, like if you want to talk about economic paradoxes, there's this whole thing since the 70s talking about peak oil. And we're always going to approach peak oil. And then oil, which is, a bunch of dead leaves from the Paleozoic or whatever era that, turn into crude oil because they're buried in the ground and then we got to go extract them. We're going to hit peak oil and then there's going to be scarcity. But peak oil, every time, we approach peak oil, people are able to, well, not people, but corporations are able to go and, figure out how to get financing to go ahead and drill more and speculate more and get more oil out of the ground. And if we're going to talk about data is the new oil, like this mining of data might just continue indefinitely. It might not get cheaper. It might get cheaper at a unit cost, possibly, but people are just going to keep mining indefinitely, and I think that like really like AI and like we look at all this open AI stuff and Sam Altman type stuff and everything that they're doing, like this whole large language model thing, I think is kind of a blip on the radar here. Like, I don't think large language models are what a lot of companies need. What they need is to train small models or smaller models on their own data. You don't need to go scrape the whole history of the internet and get 13th century battle armor Wikipedia page that you're parsing over times billions when you're trying to figure out how many customer support tickets you needed. So I think that a lot of this stuff out there right now is just total nonsense related to LLMs. But we're going to see the traction back, and companies are going to own their own sphere of data more. Anyways.
Yeah. So I don't fully agree on that, because a large language model that's transfer learned on your data is going to outperform a small model trained only on your data. This is proven. However, I do agree with what both Lauren and Matt you said, which is the same thing. Like, perhaps just by having tension and lowering unit costs, we're not actually going to decrease overall costs, which I fully agree with. My only hope there is we don't repeat, or we probably will, but like, let's keep climate in mind this time, which we didn't with oil. Let's keep climate in mind as we do more data workloads.
Yeah, every time you run 20,000 DBT models every day, it actually heats the earth a little bit more. People don't know that, but it does.
Especially when you run those data centers under the ocean. That's a problem.
Yeah, right.
Warming up the ocean.
They got these like new cooling. You can put your data. You can put the server in the data center you can dunk it in a cooler now.
That's right. Well, good conversation. This is fun. We should do this again. Find more topics to do this.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks for letting us yammer on. I mean, this took many directions that maybe you weren't expecting.
No, that's good. I needed an outlet as well for my beef. So this is good. Even though I'm vegetarian, so it's good.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for being here. It was a lot of fun.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to doing this again. Take care.
Thanks for talking. We'll see you guys soon. Thank you, Lauren. I really appreciate it.
Buy Matt's book.
Fantastic. And check out Upright Analytics and Upsolver.
That's right. Take care, everybody.
Actually, I'll quickly say Chill Data Summit, where we had one event in February, and now we're doing like a separate brand for Chill Data Summit, like a LinkedIn page and a website and stuff, because we want to keep doing these educational events. So we'll do workshops and, of course, more conferences on Iceberg, but really focus on the learning and the community aspect of it. So, in the spirit of staff engineers and other engineers should absolutely learn what's happening under the hood before buying a managed solution, including Upsolver. Become part of this community where we're just focused on learning.
And you have a really cool newsletter coming out too. So stay tuned. Lots of cool stuff. Like you said before, we want to educate the world around Iceberg. So we're doing it. We're putting it in front of everybody, and we're going to do newsletters, content, Chill Data Summit on the road, lots of fun stuff. So stay tuned.
I think that's great, Roy, because I mean, I think when I was talking about Linux, that's a lot of what made it really a community property, is like that just community push. Obviously, a lot of different companies have tried to own it and never succeeded. And so I hope we see the same thing with Iceberg, where it really is like a community heritage.
Absolutely. And I think, with Tabular kind of being sucked out, a little bit of gap in the market, we're hoping to kind of fill that gap and really help people get started. So. Sorry, Lauren, you're probably trying to say something. Keep cutting you off.
No, I'm ready to boogie. Take care, guys.
All right. Awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.